Good evening and welcome to a Kelly Files special hour on a new crisis of confidence in our government. I'm Megyn Kelly. Over the last few weeks, we have watched two stories develop that illustrate the growing divide between the American people, our elected officials, and an administration that increasingly acts as though all that matters is its own desires. One story deals with immigration and an executive action the president for years said he did not have the authority to take. The other deals with Obamacare, which was forced on the American people by an extremely controversial rule change in the U.S. Senate, and which now we know was sold with a lie. Let's start with a man named Jonathan Gruber, an MIT economist who played a pivotal role in shaping the Obamacare legislation, and recently became best known for confirming the worst fears of Obamacare's biggest critics. Here's how top Democrats described Jonathan Gruber back in the day.
CBO's experts aren't the first to recognize these benefits. Massachusetts Technologies, Jonathan Gruber, is one of the most respected economists in the world.
I don't know if you have seen Jonathan Gruber of MIT's analysis of what the comparison is to the status quo versus what will happen in our bill.
The Congressional Budget Office and Professor Gruber are both credible and unbiased sources. We're not bought and sold by the insurance industry. We've already drawn some of the brightest minds from academia and policy circles. Many of them I've stolen ideas from liberally. People ranging from Robert Gordon to Austin Goolsbee, John Gruber.
But recently, a sharp-eyed citizen, an average Joe with no obvious political agenda, turned up some revealing video of the much-lauded Mr. Gruber talking to academic peers back in 2011 and 2012 and 2013 and probably beyond, bragging that the healthcare overhaul was knowingly written and passed by using deceit and by counting on, and we quote, stupid American voters. Watch.
And basically, call it the stupidity of the American voter or whatever. But basically, that was really, really critical to get anything to pass.
The American voter is too stupid to understand it.
It's a very clever, basic exploitation of the lack of economic understanding of the American voter.
I don't think it's that the voters in Florida don't care about the low-income uninsured. I think they're just misinformed.
I think the short attention span of the American public works to his advantage here. I think a year from now, when the law's working, it will be long forgotten.
Now, the very same Democrats who attended meetings with this guy and publicly praised him by name, admitting in the president's case that they stole ideas from him, have developed a dramatic case of amnesia.
I don't know who he is. He didn't help write our bill. And so, with all due respect to your question, you have a person who wasn't writing our bill commenting on what was going on when we were writing the bill.
It wasn't his responsibility to figure out how to get this bill through. We have people who are responsible for making those kinds of legislative decisions at the White House.
I just heard about this. The fact that some advisor who never worked on our staff expressed an opinion that I completely disagree with in terms of the voters is no reflection on the actual process that was run.
Is Washington aware that we have video? Do they watch television? Now we have a more dramatic rewriting of history, this time on immigration, and this one happened just this week. Here is just a sample of the more than 24 times Mr. Obama claimed he did not have the power to ignore our immigration laws.
The notion that I can just suspend deportations through executive order, that's just not the case, because there are laws on the books that Congress has passed. We're also a nation of laws. That's part of our tradition. And so the easy way out is to try to yell and pretend like I can do something by violating our laws. I know some here wish that I could just bypass Congress and change the law myself. But that's not how democracy works. Sometimes when I talk to immigration advocates, they wish I could just bypass Congress and change the law myself. But that's not how democracy works. The problem is that, I'm the President of the United States. I'm not the Emperor of the United States. My job is to execute laws that are passed.
It was as if none of that had ever happened this week, after the midterms, when the president decided to do this thing alone, despite polls showing a majority of Americans did not want him to take that approach. Now he has signed the most sweeping executive action in American history without so much as a reference to all those times he said on camera to you. He said it directly to the American people that he didn't have the authority. And the man who often reminds us how he was a professor of constitutional law offered this, if you want to call it, an explanation.
Now, I continue to believe that the best way to solve this problem is by working together to pass that kind of common sense law. But until that happens, there are actions I have the legal authority to take as president, the same kinds of actions taken by Democratic and Republican presidents before me, that will help make our immigration system more fair and more just.
That was all we got. In moments, we'll be joined by one of the most powerful Republicans in the Senate. Senator Jeff Sessions is here. He says Congress has an historic duty to stop the president from exceeding his authority. But we begin tonight with Chris Stirewalt, who's our Fox News digital politics editor. And what I see here that you and I discussed as it happened that time and this, with Obamacare and now, is an executive who misled, or at a minimum, grossly misstated things, and refuses to be held to account. If you like your plan, you can keep your plan. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. The only reason he came out and had to acknowledge that he misled on that is because he was caught dead to rights. And even when he was caught dead to rights, and we've been jumping up and down about it here on Fox News, he blew it off, and it finally got to the point where he came out and he said, what I said all along was you could keep your plan if it met certain minimum standards. And people were ready to let him get away with that. Not us. We kept pressing. We said, that's insane. That's not at all what he said. And ultimately, he was forced, once the mainstream media also jumped on it, to admit the truth, that he had said wrong things to be charitable. And the same thing is happening now. 25 times on camera saying I don't have the legal authority. He comes out last night and says, I have the legal authority. No explanation other than some paper statement from some liberal law professors. And we're supposed to just say, okay.
Well, the question is, does he even care what we or anybody else really says about that? Because if we look at it through, I love the construct you have there, because essentially what you have in the 2012 election then is a taking up by false pretenses. The president, on the central issue of his first term, misled and continued to knowingly mislead throughout the election, obtains a second term in office, gets in, and then says, psych, sorry, it really wasn't that way, you got me. Then he says, I cannot do what you want me to do. I cannot do what my supporters say that I should do, which is to circumvent Congress, ignore the constitutional role that's laid out for the chief executive, and even describes it in fairly eloquent terms. Says, I can't do that. Then we get past another election, and what does he do? He does exactly the thing that he said he wouldn't do. So that's 2 elections in a row. Before the election, we say one thing. After the election, we say another thing. And in each time, what he's saying is, the thing I said before, not true, not germane anymore, because I'm tired of waiting. So here we go.
How is anybody supposed to believe him? How are we supposed to believe anything he tells us from this point forward?
Well, maybe it doesn't matter to him. I'm not sure. I listened to what he said last night. I've been through, I've read the president, I've read the legal brief from the Department of Justice. I've gone through, I've looked for some rationale, but there's no rationale beyond this, which is if the Congress doesn't act in a time frame that the chief executive thinks is appropriate and he gets impatient, he's allowed to legislate for them. That's new. And what I can gather out of all of this is that the president has decided that the last 2 years of his term are going to be a disaster, this hot mess of a closing
but wait, before we
of
get
his
to
8
that,
years in office.
Before we get to that, doesn't character matter? Doesn't integrity matter? Honesty? I realize politicians have to spin, and that's how, I mean, you can't become president if you're not going to be a spinner. But this is a matter of integrity. 25 times on camera, either the president was knowingly misstating things for political reasons. He knew he could do it, but he wanted to stave off these folks who were pressuring him, so he just said he couldn't. Or he's done a complete 180 on his actual beliefs and just refuses to acknowledge that to the American people. Doesn't that matter?
Well, look, we've had a lot of people talking about, the Republicans have been talking about, president is a king, the president thinks he's a monarch, the president thinks he's an emperor. If you look at the way our framers and our founders embedded the presidency into our civic culture, the president in many ways has more power than a monarch in a parliamentary society. Our president has enormous authority. He has, in the nuclear era, the power to destroy the whole world. That is how much authority and how much power our system puts in the president. The check on the president is twofold. One, what can the Congress do to him? But two, what does he as a man, what is his integrity, and how is he bound to tradition and to everything else? If he doesn't care about that second part, there's very little to constrain the man.
That's right. That's right. I mean, your word has to be worth something. And when you go back on it, you have to offer an explanation. I think the American people will listen. But nothing's being said. And a paper statement from the DOJ and some left-wing law professors isn't going to get it done. Chris, good to see you.
You bet.
Well, as we just